Well, friends, it is the last day of October, and it's a beautiful autumn day here in Washington. The lights shining through the fall leaves, and it's a perfect morning for this reading by the Harlem Renaissance poet Esther Popel. It's called October Prayer. Change me, O God, into a tree in autumn, and let my dying be a blaze of glory. Drape me in a crimson leafy gown and deck my soul in dancing flakes of gold. And then, when death comes by and with his hands strips off my rustling garment, let me stand before him, proud and naked, unashamed, uncaring, all the strength in me revealed against the sky. O God, make me an autumn tree if I must die.
Boy, that's really sad.
I love this poem, this prayer really, by the Harlem Renaissance author Esther Popel. I love how it captures the beauty and dignity of life, even as it acknowledges and embraces death. Over the years, I've read this poem at so many memorial services and All Souls Day services that to read it this morning brings back a flood of memories. So many faces of those I've loved and lost. This poem helps me remember them in all their strength and grace and dignity. Among the people this poem reminds me of is an elderly woman who died early on in my ministry at All Souls Church in Washington. I'll never forget visiting her one morning not long before her death. She told me that in recent months and years, many of her friends had died, and that most of them were Christians who, as they approached death, took comfort from the Christian promise that after death, they would experience a reunion with their departed loved ones and with God in heaven. This woman didn't happen to share her friends' belief in an afterlife. And she wondered aloud what consolation or wisdom our Unitarian Universalist tradition offers those facing death. She asked me, Rob, what does it mean to die a Unitarian Universalist? We had a long conversation about it that day, and when I left her, I realized that I, as a UU minister, owed not only her, but all the people I serve an answer to that question. What does it mean to die a Unitarian Universalist? And so that day I made a promise that every year on All Souls Sunday, I would share with my congregation a small portion of the wisdom and consolation our faith offers us, as we wrestle with the meaning of our mortality. And in the time we have left this morning, that's what I hope to share with all of you. Now, of course, there's no single Unitarian teaching on this subject. There's no official UU catechism on death and dying. But there is a stream of wisdom about living and dying that flows down to us from our ancestors. And I thought I could frame some of that wisdom this morning by sharing with you two very brief stories about the death of one of our most famous Unitarian ancestors, Henry David Thoreau. I thought I'd share these stories and then just share what they illuminate about our tradition. So if you will, journey with me to the year 1862 and to the Thoreau family home in Concord, Massachusetts, where Henry David, at age 44, lay dying of tuberculosis. In his final days, Thoreau was cared for by his mother, Cynthia, and sister, Sophia, and he received visits from a host of extended family and friends. But one story goes that as Thoreau lay dying, one of his aunts, an aunt of a more orthodox religious persuasion, came to his bedside and prayed for his conversion. Hopeful that the prospect of death would finally put the fear of God in her religiously unorthodox nephew, the aunt asked Thoreau, "Henry David, have you finally made your peace with God?" To which Thoreau responded, "I wasn't aware that we'd quarreled." That's the first story. More on this later. The second story goes that a close friend visited Thoreau on the last day of his life, and taking Thoreau's hand in his own, he drew near and whispered to Thoreau, "Henry David, have you glimpsed the light of the other shore?" To which Thoreau is said to have replied with his dying breath, "One world at a time. One world at a time." Now, I have no idea whether either of these stories actually happened, but I do know them to be true. True to Thoreau's character, true to his gift for the apt and often playful one-liner, and more importantly, true to the religious tradition that we share with him. So let's take that second story first, the one where Thoreau's friend asks him if he's glimpsed the other shore, and he replies, "One world at a time." I love this story. For Thoreau at the brink of death to say, "One world at a time," is to express a deep appreciation for the worth, value, and goodness of this life, this world, the one we're living right now, the only one we know of for sure. While some faiths eagerly anticipate paradise in the by and by, ours encourages us to discover paradise and to help create it in the here and now. This perspective encourages us to live fully in the present, one world at a time, one moment at a time, to notice the beauty of the earth, the beauty of life, to savor it, to protect and preserve it, to not wait around for justice to prevail in heaven, but to help create a more just world here on earth. When we live our lives fully present to one another and to the earth, then when it comes time for us to die, we don't have so many regrets. Thoreau doesn't sound like a man who's leaving the world with a lot of regrets, or that he's counting on what comes next to compensate for any lack in this world. Up until the very end, Thoreau is savoring life, one world at a time. A while back, a colleague of mine and I were interviewed on public radio about different religions' approaches to life and death. And at one point in the interview, the host turned to my colleague UU colleague, and asked him point blank, do Unitarians believe in life after death? I was grateful that she asked him that question on live radio and not me. Do Unitarians believe in life after death? My colleague thought about it for a moment, and he responded finally, we believe in life after birth. And he wasn't just being clever with that line. He was saying, this life is the one we believe in, the one we put our faith and trust and hope in. My colleague went on, we don't necessarily deny that there's something that follows death. It's just that our foremost spiritual concern is not so much what happens when I die, but what happens when I stop living? When I'm alive, but I've stopped living. Stop being fully present to life. The radio host seemed surprised by this reframing of her question. She said, it's a good point. Friends, some religions focus their efforts on preparing people's souls for the next life. As Unitarian Universalists, our goal is perhaps more modest and more audacious. We're really trying to equip souls for this life, life after birth, so that we can live joyful and meaningful and loving lives in this world. So that when we come to die, we feel as though we've lived a life worthy of the precious gift we've been given. When it comes down to it, this is why I'm a Unitarian Universalist. Because at some point I decided that I wasn't going to hold out for some future paradise, that I was going to cast my lot with this life and with this world, for better or for worse, one world at a time. Now, before I close, I want to come back to that first deathbed story told about Thoreau. The one about his Orthodox aunt who fears for the fate of his immortal soul. And first of all, I don't know a Unitarian who doesn't have some Orthodox relative who's fearing for our soul and praying for our conversion, right? I know I do. And the aunt says to Thoreau, Henry David, have you finally made your peace with God? And he replies, I wasn't aware that we'd quarreled. Thoreau's words here speak to a core premise and promise of our faith. That our relationship with God, however we understand God, or our relationship to the universe, is not fundamentally an antagonistic one. That in a fundamental way, we are at home in the universe. We belong. And that if there is a God, that we are reconciled and at one with that God. It's the faith that whether in this life or the next, and no matter our struggles or our sufferings, our trials and our tribulations, that ultimately we are held in the arms of love, now and forever. This is a belief that our religious ancestors fought passionately to defend. They rebelled against a New England Puritan tradition that often portrayed human beings as sinners in the hands of an angry God, to borrow a phrase from Jonathan Edwards. a tradition that portrayed God as an angry father whose wrath must be appeased, or a feudal lord to whom we owed a great debt. Our ancestors said, that's not the God that we know and love. And they pointed back to the book of Genesis, where it says that God lovingly created the world and created human beings in God's own image, and that when God was done with all of that, God pronounced it all good. This vision of human beings, God, and the world reconciled and at one with each other is a bedrock principle of our faith. It doesn't mean that we don't stray or struggle. But in the end, we are all held in the embrace of love. Have you made your peace with God? She asked. I wasn't aware that we'd quarreled. Taken together, these two stories suggest that Thoreau died at peace with himself and with the life he'd lived, at peace with the world and with the God of his understanding. That peace was informed in part by his Unitarian faith, by its invitation to be fully present to life and the world, and by its assurance that we are indeed at one with the universe and with God, that we are held in a loving embrace. And all in all, you get the impression that though he died young, he died grateful. And that another way to sum up Thoreau's final words might be simply, thank you. When our days are over, may our hearts be filled with gratitude. And may thank you be the final prayer on our lips. Amen.